Tara, thank you so much for chatting with me today. I am really excited to talk with you about communication. You and I have known each other for I don't know how many years, but we always love chatting about marketing and communication and how that really impacts businesses and organizations. So I would love for you to share a little bit about your background in speaking and communication, entrepreneurship, all of that.
Well, thank you, Amanda. I'm so excited to be here. I'm so happy that you asked me to chat with you today. So, my business story goes back to 2007. So, that was when I started freelancing. And that primarily at the time was website content and Facebook, because that was like the only social media. I mean, there's MySpace for 5 minutes, but no, Facebook was like the only thing. So I kind of became Facebook girl. That's what they called me, and did a lot of website content, internet marketing, and people started asking me to teach and to speak on these subjects. So I couldn't say no because I was poor. So I said yes. But I discovered along the way that I really like teaching. So I still do a bit of that, enjoying doing it virtually as well. And since then, my business has grown into a marketing consultancy that covers all types of digital marketing. As you know, there have been at least a dozen significant networks that we've added to our repertoire since 2007, and that continues to change and grow. So that keeps me busy,
Oh,
keeps
for
me employed.
Absolutely. And it's fun to be in a space that's ever changing, especially for somebody that likes to learn, because you'll always be sought out as, someone to teach and to lead, and to help businesses, pave the way. I know I've heard you talk about communication before, and one of the things I really wanted to chat with you about was communication in the workplace. Can you tell me, like, what is the impact of bad communication in an organization, and maybe what does that look like?
Good question. So really that's how this part of my business started, was because I saw so many companies that had a problem with they thought they had a problem with their marketing when it wasn't their marketing. They had a deeper internal problem that was always something to do with communication. But they thought they could fix it by throwing some marketing money at it. We've got this going on, but if you just put this out to the world and tell them this message, that's going to fix the problem. But that was never the problem. It was always something deeper. So my first book, Flex Your Communication, really came out of a need, a necessity to help address some of these root issues of communication in the workplace. And a lot of the symptoms from that were things like high turnover. That was a big one, where people just weren't happy in their workplace. Employees were not engaged. And supervisors, managers, they're frustrated because they weren't getting quality work from their employees. So there was a lot of miscommunication between different areas of business. There's always a mentality between the people who do the work and the people who sit in the office upstairs. So it was trying to figure a way to get these people to work together, to communicate, and then their message could be authentic out into the marketplace. When you fix what's really going on, when you're actually living those core values, the mission, the vision, they're not just something hanging up on the wall, that's when marketing is really fun, and that's when it works.
100%. And when you walk into an organization that has silos, it's immediately obvious, especially to an outsider, when you can see that departments aren't communicating, or maybe they're even competing for things. It really, like, instead of getting energy to grow, like putting that energy into growing your business and like getting new customers and making things better, you're using your energy to fight internal things. I'm like, that's just not, doesn't make business sense. So I love that feedback. That's really good. I know I've heard you speak before too on like the impact of gender roles in communication at work. Can you explain that a little bit, and like how can we avoid like looking at someone through the lens of gender?
Oh, great question. A very complex subject. So, really, there are two things that we need to know about communication in the first place. So, first of all, our communication is dynamic, it is always changing. We don't say the things now that we said a generation ago,
Mhm.
even a week ago. It's constantly changing. So, that requires us to really be flexible. Hence the premise of the book, flexible in our communication. We have to flex. The other thing is our communication is systemic. So, two is systemic, it occurs in systems. Where we communicate, who we communicate with, all those things impact the meaning of what we have to say. And the gender is just one aspect of that communication. One thing that I see all the time, I actually just had a conversation earlier today about a woman who's planning a leadership conference with the fact that women used to be told to act like men at work. Well, obviously, that's not the advice anymore, and for good reason, because characteristics that are generally considered to be more feminine definitely have a place at work. There's a place for empathy, compassion, all of those good things that women or who were people who were raised in a female gendered communication style tend to possess. We need all of those qualities.
Yeah, that's super true. I even remember like when I first entered the workplace, like I thought it would, it would be good for me to act like a man and to like copy that. But I've really found that it's not. Like you said, there's certainly a place in the work, in the work environment for some of those qualities. And I think even in the past, maybe 5 or 6 years, I've seen a really big push towards, empathetic leaders, empathetic marketing. Empathy is so important now because it was missing for a long time. And I even think the impact of generations on what their motivations are, it used to be money, money, money. And now we see, generate the generations that are the bulk of the workforce now, that's not always their lead motivator. And it could be other things. And oftentimes, like you said, like that, those female qualities might be things that can kind of help motivate them more than, maybe that traditionally people think of like male driven behaviors.
You bring up a really good point with the generation piece, because I think part of that shift is because generational changes. People expect more transparency now than ever before,
Yep.
especially with our youngest generation. You've seen it, right? Social media, they expect to hear what their grandma had for lunch, or that, their grandpa just got a new Harley and is out riding with his girlfriend. Like, we see all of these things that we never would have seen or heard before. And I think our generations, as these younger generations come up, they're sharing those values with us, that they value transparency and authenticity in a different way, which is really exciting to me. To me, that's really refreshing. I appreciate it.
Yeah. And I also think like the internet has become an amazing tool to expose anybody that's not doing that. So it's like if you're not being authentic and real in your communication, well, guess like you're gonna get found out about. Like it's gonna happen. And so 100%. I think it's good when you earlier mentioned like when businesses and organizations, companies, when they live their core values, like that's what you need to do. And if you're not, it's going to get exposed eventually.
Yeah.
We've talked a little bit about this already, but what are some tips and tricks that maybe could help improve communication in the workforce for an individual?
Okay. One that I see a lot right now that can be really a simple switch is by simply being aware of the other person's communication preferences. So today, I think a big option is being aware of what their media preference is. Do they prefer something like this, where we're chatting over video conference? Would they prefer a phone call or email? Those
Mhm.
things we can pick up by what they do. I think of one client who I'd send an email. Every time I would email him, he would call me, like right away. He would call me. So then I realized, okay, he just wants me to call him. That's what he prefers. So that requires awareness on our part and the willingness to be flexible to communicate the way they want to be communicated with. And sure, that requires a little sacrifice from us, but don't we want to make things easier for them rather than insisting on what we would prefer? So that's one little change that I think any one of us can make. And especially now, I think we all owe each other that little extra bit of dignity and flexibility to just meet them where they are. I think that can really, really help. Another big issue that I see that requires just a small change is jargon.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, all the acronyms, all of the industry phrases that we use, that really can hinder communication. We think that we're cool because we know these acronyms. No, it can just really frustrate the other person who we're talking to. And I see this all the time coming in as a consultant, where within an organization or an industry, they have these different ways of speaking that I come in and I have no idea what they're talking about. So I think that's something all of us can work on, is trying to speak in more simple terms and eliminate the jargon, eliminate the acronyms, and we'll be able to understand without making anyone feel foolish either. I that can be really hard on your ego if you have to be like, what's a CMS, or what, whatever the acronym is that we're using at the moment.
That's a really good point. I remember one of the roles I've had previously at a very different organization had a periodic table of acronyms. And like, I remember I started and somebody handed this to me and I was like, oh my God, I'm never going to be able to learn all of these things. And when you're saying like acronyms and jargon can frustrate people, yeah, but it also makes them feel stupid. And like, if you're trying to get, have employee engagement or get a new customer and you're making them feel stupid, they're not going to be your customer.
Oh yeah.
Or they're not going to stick around for long if you're always trying to talk over their head or talk about how much you know. And I
Mhm.
think that's kind of like a paradigm shift, like you were talking about earlier. Instead of enforcing our way on other people, we should take a minute and think about, what do other people want from us? Because that shows you really have their best interest at heart, and that, like you said, you're willing to make a sacrifice to make it more comfortable for them. I love that. So you've heard about a lot of communication. You've been in a lot of organizations. You've helped them button up how they talk to one another, how they talk to the marketplace, how they represent themselves. So I'm sure you heard some funny stories or seen some crazy things. Are there any super funny communication mishaps that come to mind?
Well, I don't know if funny is the right word. I think probably what I notice most is insensitivities.
Oh yeah.
And insensitivities, especially if they think they're being funny, are really, really not funny. Our timing can mean everything. Um, I think of one mistake, and this was on me. So when it comes to posting things on social media, I often would schedule my posts to go out because you want them to hit at a certain time in a certain place for whenever that particular audience is active. And I think about a time that I scheduled a post to go out for, I'm trying to keep it vague here. We'll say it was a family entertainment venue. And the post was related to, and I thought it was humorous, it was related to flooding. Timing, not so good timing because there happened to be a major flood that happened right when this post was scheduled. So I guess now in hindsight, maybe it seems a little humorous, but in the moment, it just came across as really insensitive.
Yeah.
So I had to right away go and find that, grab it, pull it down. When those kinds of things happen, it just shows a lack of awareness of what's going on. It shows insensitivity. So most of the posting that I do today, I actually do in real time for that reason, to make sure there aren't any any faux pas. Check the trending topics. That's another big one. Or hashtags. If there's a hashtag that's popular and you want to tag onto it, that can be great. That can get you in front of a lot of people, unless the
Right.
hashtag isn't something you want to be associated with. So I've seen that too. And sometimes it's funny, but it's also really unfortunate if you're not sensitive, if you don't know what you're really saying.
Yeah, I think that's interesting too, because you think like a joke about a flood seems really not like it would be that big of a deal. But really, when an environment change or the context can change, it can be a really big deal. And of course, there are all things that we love to be animated or automated, not animated, automated, whether it's an email series or having social media posts going out. But your example, we still got to have a pulse on that.
Mhm.
You still got to check and know. And I think that's something that people kind of lose a little bit. And when things are overly automated, you can tell right away.
Yeah, for sure. It's really easy to lose the personal touch when you become such a machine. And that's something that I've struggled with, in finding that balance between what is an appropriate client load for me, even because if you get too heavy of a load, if you're too stressed out, you're not you're not aware of how things might come across. And we see the same thing in workplace communication. When we're under stress, that's when we communicate poorly. We snap when we're hangry, right? That's when we make mistakes. So for all of us to improve our communication would be really to slow down, take a deep breath, and think. Just think before you put it out there. First you think the words, then you speak the words, or type or write, or whatever the case may be.
Yep. And lastly, I know you and I have joked about this before. We're both actually introverts and really don't mind not communicating. Like we're totally cool without communication sometimes. But what tips would you have for those of us who maybe are introverted but have a hard time with communication? What tips would you give to like help open up and kind of get the communication flowing?
Thank you for that question. I'm sure there are a lot of people out there who are wondering exactly that. So my biggest, I guess, tip for that would be that it's okay. It's okay. Accept it. And it's okay if it's uncomfortable. It's okay if you have to pretend. It's okay if you have to put on a show. It's okay. All of it is okay. There's nothing wrong with a person because they happen to be more introverted.
Mhm.
It's okay if you're less socially poised introvert or more socially poised introvert. It's okay how frequency of your interaction, all of that. I just want to put that out that it's all okay. What helps me is convincing myself that I can do it. So I actually give myself a pep talk before I have to speak. I now, not so much in the in-person environment, but when it was an in-person environment, I'd often go into the bathroom and I'd go into a big stall and I would do some Amy Cuddy power poses.
I love that. Starfish.
And I would tell myself, and it's cheesy, but it works. I would tell myself, you know, today I'm going to talk to people and they're going to look at me and it's going to be okay because I have something to say. And those kinds of phrases, just reminding myself of those facts and reminding myself that it's okay. It's all okay. There's no real threat. As scary as it feels to talk in front of people, generally they don't throw stuff at you or walk out on you. Like, I mean, it hasn't happened to me yet since 2007. So I think it's pretty safe to say it's going to be okay. It's
Yeah.
going to be okay. And today people have more choices than ever for where they want to go to take in content. So
Mhm.
in this virtual environment, it's even less painful because you'll never even know if they clicked off. You'll
Right.
never even know. So there's no bruised ego in that. There's no hurt in that. But again, I do think the communication is a skill that we can all work on. There are always things that we can do to improve. So if you feel like you're not a confident speaker or feel like you're introverted, it's okay to find an area that you choose to work on. I'm not saying you have to overhaul your entire personality. We need introverts. We need people who can think with that part of their brain, who operate in that way. We need that. But
Mhm.
just maybe pick one or two small things that you do want to work on. If it's speaking up in meetings, decide you're going to speak up in meetings. And it's okay if it feels uncomfortable. I like to liken it to when we get dressed for work. Sometimes it feels like putting on a costume.
Mhm.
I'm wearing tennis shoes right now, but if I were speaking in a public venue, I would likely be wearing a sheath dress and high heels. And that's my costume. That's what I put on to go to work. And if you're an introvert, sometimes you just got to put it on to go to work. And that's all right. It's okay if it's not real. So much of what we do isn't real. It's all these fabricated environments. So why not fabricate your presentation a little bit? It's perfectly acceptable.
Well, and I think too, when an introvert needs to like step out of their comfort zone, um, it doesn't mean that like you're being false to who you are. Like you said, it's, you put on a costume because it does show your personality. You pick out that dress because you like the design on it and you like how it makes you look. And you pick out the shoes because you love them, even though it's not necessarily comfortable for you to wear all day. But you pick it out because that's what you want to present to the world. And I think like as an introvert, you pick out who you want to represent like what costume do you want to put on to represent yourself? And even if it doesn't come naturally, that's still who you desire to be. So
Mhm.
it's not like you're being false to yourself. It's just, what do I want to put out there in the world? I love that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Well put. Mhm.
Awesome. Well, Tara, thank you so much for talking today. As always, I love chatting with you. And yeah, I hope that we get to do it again in the future.
For sure. Thank you. So good to see you.
You too.